Excellent. Here we are, and a very warm welcome to everybody. My name is Victoria Dangerfield. I have today the immense pleasure of talking to Len Holmes. Len, you are a very interesting man, and I want myself and everybody else to learn a lot more about you. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm fine. It's my pleasure to join you. So thank you.
Beautiful. Oh, well, we'll get started. Len, you are an expert in the travel industry. Tell us, first of all, a little bit about your background. Very interested about that. And how did you get involved in the travel industry itself?
Okay. I'll make I won't make a shaggy dog story out of it, but I'll start at the beginning by indicating that my dad was a Boston historian. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. And my dad's interest in Boston history, the American Revolution, and everything beyond made him the family tour guide for all visitors to our family and other visitors to the city one way or another. And I ended up tagging along many times. So my dad's route ultimately became the Freedom Trail in Boston, and any tour guides in Boston know the Freedom Trail very well. And thus I heard the stories of Old North Church, Paul Revere, Granary Street Burying Ground, and of course the Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre many times over. But what I got from my dad, the historical information may have gone over my head in some cases, but what went unrecognized was the way my dad could tell the stories. But I think by going on that many tours, I was given the gift of gab or conversation, and so that was with me at the end of my freshman year in college when I got a job in the summer, my first tour guide job, working for the Boston Symphony Orchestra at that summer home in Tanglewood, Massachusetts, out in the Massachusetts Berkshires. Wonderful job, wonderful experience. And I have to say I succeeded as a tour guide, but at that point we have to fast forward to finishing college, a stint in the U.S. Navy, a business career through the time frame of 2011. Which was the first time that I was totally unemployed for the year. So I had to have other activities. I ultimately volunteered in 2013 for the America's Cup event in San Francisco. And on my way into the city on our public transportation BART, I saw a woman sitting across the aisle from me, and she was intently studying a map. That's a tour guide. And then a voice went off in my head that said, "Be careful, she may just be an intense tourist like yourself, like me, who studies map before they go off on their visit." I had to find out. So I scooted across the aisle, took the empty seat next to her, and I flat out just asked her, "Are you a tour guide?" And yes. And by the time we got to the San Francisco City, the Embarcadero station, I had learned about this school, before which I'd never heard of, ITMI, International Tour Management Institute. I had made a decision already that I would look them up, and within a month I was signed up. They had my deposit. I graduated in October 2013, and the first week in November I was doing the first of my 3 circuits a day on the top deck of the hop-on bus in San Francisco, and that's how I got in the tour industry. It was a great way to stay active in a life without other employment, and it's just been a godsend to me at this stage of my life. Very, very pleasant story to share.
Thank you, Len. It is indeed. And how interesting that obviously, yes, your father was your very first inspiration. He would be proud of you if he could see you now, I'm sure.
Yeah, I passed the test. He at one time with the family in the family car, drove into the driveway and was threatening to leave me off at the Massachusetts State Prison in Concord, Massachusetts at one time. So maybe I did redeem myself ultimately.
Ooh, you definitely redeemed yourself with your very fruitful career. Tell me, Len, you were president of the San Francisco Tour Guide Guild, and where you mentored a lot of us guides. I remember very clearly when you were in that capacity. And also you shared your passion for the history of San Francisco. You've lived in the city now for over 50 years, am I correct?
That is correct.
What, out of your role in that capacity as president, did you enjoy the most? And how long did you hold that role for?
Okay, I'll take a liberty. I held the president's position for 3 years. I was on the board of trustees for 4.
Mm-hmm.
To totally address your question, I have to talk about the first year that I was on the board of trustees before I get to the president's job. Because in the very first year, I was the membership chairperson for the guild, and well, I still to this day enjoy everything guild related.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a wonderful experience as membership chairperson in the guild. I didn't know it at the time, but I've come to learn, and I pass this on to any guide who might be watching at some point. As membership chair, you have not only a permission, but you have a responsibility to make contact with many of the guild members. Sadly, most frequently, the need comes due at retirement time. But regardless, as membership chair, you can come up with any kind of reasons to make connections with as many guides as you want to. And the connections in the guide community are crucial, I think, to ultimate success. Because when a guide is unavailable for a job, the first thing he or she wants to do is to make a reference to the operator. And if you're membership chair and you've established a few credentials and shared your personality, you'll get on some people's reference list, and that's extremely valuable. So to answer your question, what did I like most? That was a good experience for me to serve in that capacity. But moving on to the presidency, it was kind of a happenstance to get into the job in the first place. But once in there, there were enough people who didn't have enough information to vote me out, so I ended up staying for 3 years. I'm proud to have shared, thanks to the volunteer efforts of a lot of people who supported me and helped us move forward. But in 2014, when I was late in 2014, 2015, when I first took over, almost all of our financial transactions were being done by paper check or cash.
Mm-hmm.
And moving all that paper around, depositing the checks, was tedious for both the treasurer and for whoever the program person was or the membership person was. And there were errors. Sometimes checks were lost, sometimes on the part of the guide, who ended up having to absorb the loss. And fairly soon, we were able to establish the ability to do finances with credit cards. It was kind of helter-skelter or hit or miss at the beginning, but at this point, almost everything is electronic, creating lots of efficiencies that we didn't have before. Also, the Guild has a requirement for continuing education, and in the dinosaur age, a person would go on a credit-worthy program, a tour, a familiarization tour, or participate in an activity, and they would receive from the organizer a piece of paper, which they would have to hold on to until the end of the year, renewal time. They would have to send the one pieces of paper they got in with their renewal check so that the membership chairman could validate that they satisfied the requirements for ongoing membership. And that was tedious, and I dare say the program fell down a little bit just because it was cumbersome. And by getting the system that we have now, Club Express, we can track all of the attendance and all of the events that we have, and it's a 1-minute report writing activity to know who has satisfied their continuing education credits. And so that's a source of satisfaction. And there are many other components to the activities the Guild has done in the recent time, none of which could be done without not only myself, but others supporting me and participating. So it concludes at this time of slow activity as being a little bit depressing, but I'm really enthusiastic because we're still improving and making changes. And when the world comes back to some sort of reality, the Guild will be in a good position to move forward and continue the success that we have. I do have one regret, however, as long as we're on the subject, because I did participate in a little bit of a role with the Guild's newsletter called The Guidepost, which for almost 30 years was published with only one or two very brief interruptions. But at this point, the Guidepost has not been published for about 2 years or so. And we have the technical ability to do it pretty easily on the new website. We just need enthusiasm, I think, from the membership to bring it back, and one or two, maybe three volunteers to participate. And we could get it rolling again. So that's the one thing that I left undone when I stepped down. And it's not the end of the world, but it is the last component of my role as a president that I'll share.
Excellent. Thank you, Len, for all this information. And I myself, being a member of the Guild since 2012, have really benefited from a lot of the aspects that the Guild has to offer. I've noticed, especially this year, with us not being to see each other and have our fan trips, educational tours, but a lot has been done online with some very interesting speakers. Tell me about traveling. You have seen many places in this big wide world, or what has been, if there's any one that has impressed you the most, or one where you would say, I could go back again, and because it's a place where I feel very comfortable. Which is it? Is it a city or even a little town? Or?
Well, there's I think many people would come up with the same initial answer. There's so many, it'd be hard to pick one specifically, but I can actually address the specific question you asked. In terms of picking one, I think that from the broad perspective, probably one of the most rewarding trips I took was actually a business trip. I was assigned a work project in Tel Aviv, Israel. And, got to go to Israel for a couple of weeks. And my wife came along on that trip, and I won't say it was a life-changing experience, but the opportunity to actually physically be in the Middle East, in Israel, gave both myself and my wife a completely, I won't say new, but a completely expanded exposure of what the situation is like in the Middle East. And so they're in the news so much, but I dare say, speaking for myself, we didn't really know much of anything about the real issues and the real status of what was going on in Israel. And although it was a fairly short period, it was monumental in terms of getting a feel for the situation. This was not long after the Intifada, and where people had been blown up on buses. And that's what you heard about on the news, but the actual real life living situation is considerably different than what we might perceive. And of course, going to Israel is one thing, but you have to also, to get the whole picture, touch base at least in one other Arab country to get maybe a balancing sensitivity of some people who think differently than the people of Israel. And so that's necessary. And put those two together, and the trip to Israel was fabulous. But I guess from a sightseeing standpoint, I have to mention Iguazu Falls in Argentina, Brazil, and Peru. A monumental site, was very rewarding. But I'd also like to, in terms of travel, talk about one location in the United States. a specific town called Girard, Kansas.
Oh,
After
never heard of this one.
You've never heard of Girard, but you have heard of America's Heartland. You've heard of flyover country, and Girard, Kansas is in flyover country. And I got there by riding my bicycle from my house to Girard on my way to Grandma's house in eastern Canada. And this was a long, self-supported bicycle tour, bike loaded up with bags and packs and sleeping bags and paraphernalia, which attracted attention. Stop at a coffee shop, stop at a convenience store, and it's not unusual that somebody would come up and ask a few questions. And that's what Harold Anderson did at Girard, Kansas. And he was a rancher, farmer in that area. This is southern Kansas. And he just asked me a couple of questions, got the conversation going, and we had a nice time. He was a good guy, typical rancher, cowboy hat,
wow,
kid and caboodle. And after I finished answering most of his questions, I imposed on him to answer a few of mine. By the end of, I don't know, whether 20 minutes to a half an hour, I had a considerable amount of new information about agricultural economics, the relative price of corn and wheat and barley. I learned about cattle, how big his herd was, how many acres could feed 10 cattle or whatever, how long you raise the cattle until you send them off to the feedlot, and learned a little bit about ethanol and wheat. How do you know when to actually harvest the wheat? And it was a wonderful conversation and gave me a similar insight to America's heartland. I got going to Israel. You got to be there to get the real appreciation. And of course, I had many other experiences in American heartland, in the flyover country through my work, and I kind of knew some of this, but this was really close to the heart of it when you get in a nice conversation with just a local, and it was a memorable experience. So to summarize, from flyover country in America's heartland to the volatile Middle East, the greatest appreciation for travel and learning for local issue is attained by physically traveling to those areas. And we hope that comes back to life after this COVID situation. I hope that works out for a good answer to your question.
It is incredibly good. Wow. And very, very enlightening. This is food for thought. This is something you should publish in the guidepost, because a lot of us would love to hear about, more in depth of your experiences of these places. Very different, of course. And as you say, you have to be there to really breathe, to really live what the culture is.
Thank you for referencing or suggesting that might be a guidepost item. I will have to go back to the files and share with you the issue number and the page number, because that tour has been written up in the guidepost.
Well, I would love to see it. Yes.
I'll let you know.
Beautiful. You have also talked about, Len, your years in the business world, where you held positions of executive there, senior executive for numerous years. I was reading about a little bit about your history, and how would you compare, if there is any comparison? They're very diverse worlds, but corporate America and the travel industry, do they have any points in common?
I'm sure they do, but I have to admit that I'm intimately familiar with the business world. I would say in general, because my experience in the packaging industry, probably from a theoretical standpoint, is replicated throughout all of business. But I don't know the travel industry from the inside anywhere near as well. Of course, all businesses are looking to make a profit. As an employee, the packaging industry was very good to me. I started at the bottom and worked my way up, learned computers, and ultimately had an equity position at one point and was able to build up over 42 years. It wasn't monumental. I don't have anything to worry about if they impose a wealth tax coming down the line sometime, but I'm okay in retirement, and that was good. As a tour guide, I think, and again, I can't be too specific because my time is not that long, but I think tour guides who are careful, who work full time over the road and work, as much as they can throughout the year, probably can build a respectable retirement. But step-on guides or part-time guides, it's not a business where the individual guide can build a strong retirement. In my observation, I don't. Other people might have a different story on that, but that's been my observation. So what I have seen is that tour guides, once they succeed in the field and actually want to have a normal family life, oftentimes go inside and they work for a tour operator more or less in a business, kind of like what I did in the packaging world. And my guess is that once they get in there, they have similar experiences. Our problem oftentimes was, how are we going to make the delivery that we promised on Tuesday when we don't have enough machines to get the work out? And inside, in the travel business, whoever's behind that operational desk is, how can we get 40 buses for the tours that have been booked for this particular week? And those pressures are probably very similar up and down the ladder inside the travel industry. Of course, the travel industry today, I have no idea what the real status of the travel industry is, but the packaging industry is still going because Amazon is going gangbusters. And they need boxes. So I'm sure that there's some direct comparisons. But the thing about tour guiding and guides in particular is the fact that tour guides have the opportunity to make people smile as part of their job. Of course, as people, we always want to make the people that we're around happy, and we want a good environment. But guides are especially expected to give people good experiences. And anytime a guide, whether they're a new guide coming out of ITMI or any of the other schools, trip school, or whether they're retired from another profession like myself and just sharing information and congeniality with guests, there's that similarity, and that'll never go away. And I kind of like to share a personal example of how you can make smiles, and it relates to the Presidio in San Francisco. Presidio, of course, was built by the Spanish in the early days and became one of the largest military installations on the West Coast with the U.S. Army. San Francisco was a major town, major military town, until they closed the Presidio and many of the other naval stations. But the Presidio gets mentions and sometimes visited on most any San Francisco 4-hour tour.
Oh, yeah.
The opportunity to tell this story generally always presents itself. It works on any tour. It works particularly well, and I've had the opportunity to do a couple of military retirement tours. A group of 2 buses came out to do a reunion on the USS Hornet over in Alameda. And, it really works well if all you need is a couple to get the big guffaws. But the reality is, when the Presidio was in full operation, anybody in the military, any service, any rank, enlisted officer, any grade, could go into the Presidio Theater for free, with one exception. They did not allow admirals in the Presidio Theater. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. No, and I've given numerous tours of the Presidio. That's news to me.
Well, it was the reality, and the reason for that reality, because that theater was general admission only. General admission only. General versus
general admission. Oh, got it. Oh.
so that's my story. And people laugh. I mean, it's hard not to. Well, they laugh, or they might groan. And
Oh, who would groan at something like this, though? It's good.
well,
It's witty.
what I've learned, I mean, I've been accused of telling groaner jokes on some of my tours, but the fact is, people will complain, but they also thank you when they're getting off the bus, handing you some kind of green paper that they do once in a while, and they say, "I loved your jokes." I mean, it works.
We like that green paper. Bring it on. Oh, no, you're right. It's all about creating memories, and you might only be with these folk for maybe 4 hours at the most, but it's the impact that you have on them, and the what you contribute to their holiday is that some memories, will stay forever, I think.
Right.
Storytelling and jokes, absolutely. Um, since we're talking, of course, about the tour industry, Len, I want to ask your expertise, and given the ongoing pandemic that has really decimated our business, how do you foresee it evolving? What future do you see for the tour industry in the next few months? Next spring, for instance, which is when it starts to wake up. What's your take on that?
I'm as well informed or poorly informed as anybody or everybody on that one. I really don't know. But of course, we're all thinking about it. And I think we'd have agreement pretty quickly that virtual touring is with us and will stay with us for probably forever. Now, I don't know how that will all develop, but frankly, if I had just a little bit, well, I still might do it. I just haven't decided to actually commit the time. But one of the tours I did for the Guild, the Downtown Financial History and Building Tour, went over very well, and I could very easily convert that to a virtual tour. And then the challenge is you have to go out and sell it. But just earlier this morning, I was on a video call with the Travel Massive group, and the whole presentation was about how you pivot from what you used to do to something new. And of course, there's a lot of people doing that. There have been some successes let's say emerging successes. We have to see what the long-term place for people who are doing it. And it takes a commitment and a dedication. But I think the common thread that's going to prevail as we move forward for guides who survive coming through here is I'm sure most people are familiar with the follow your passion, follow the dream. If you're passionate about something, things happen, and other people, potential passengers, guests, clients, recognize the passion. And if anybody has got a dream or a thought or a vision of creating an independent company, now is the time to do it. I did learn a lesson in the packaging world. The best time to start a new business is in an economic downturn. Because the whole world has been turned upside down, and everybody's looking for new ways, and they're more receptive to new entities, new ideas to be presented than they would when everything was going well, coasting along. And so now is the right time for anybody. My thoughts go first to tour guides. If there's a spark of interest, pursue that dream, because now is the right time. Now, as far as the big companies go, I think it's going to take years actually for all the dust to settle on that. We lost two tours this year, 2020. My wife and I had two major trips scheduled, both of which got canceled. One of them's been rebooked for June of this year, and I'm beginning to think that maybe even that tour, it's a cruise or river cruise in Europe, and it may not go. And so I just don't know how long it's going to take, and I don't know how the financial, there's mortgages on buildings or whatever. The cruise companies still got to pay for whatever they've got, whatever loans they have out against the ships or the operations. I just don't. I'm sorry, I can't give you much insight on that.
Yes. No, that's appreciated. It has really hit us hard in many ways, And let's hope for a recovery, even on a smaller scale, even on a walking tour scale. But as you say, it's hard to predict how things will evolve, where 2021 will take us. Len, this is very interesting. One final insight out of all your endeavors and achievements, numerous achievements in your interesting trajectory. You should write a book. What have you learned most, and what do you want to share with us that is significant? What do you think? Yes, this has taught me a life lesson.
Okay, that gives me the entree. The last sentence. Thank you. That's it. I actually just put my thinking cap on. Let me answer that by actually referencing three people who had made an indelible impression. Of course, there's many people that impact what you do in life, but I can give you three examples of people who I can point or attribute to very specific lessons learned. And it'll start with my dad. Among many other lessons, he imparted in me a great appreciation for the art of conversation. Now, we never talked about the art of conversation, but as he got older and he was losing his eyesight, he had me read the newspaper, the editorials in the newspapers. He had me read other articles. This was way before computers and, all that we can do now. And of course, that sparked conversation, and he was always a great conversationalist, but I never really thought about it as a skill or an entity or a proclivity that meant anything, but it means almost everything. The more conversation you can with people, the more stimulations, the more connections you make, and it's a vital portion to anybody's success, I think. And so I attribute my dad for giving me that gift, and it's just one of the great happinesses that I had. Second in line, I will mention a person who had a major influence, left with me with some lifelong lessons, which I really do try to share. His name was Jack Kelly. He was my hockey coach at Boston University. Growing up in Boston, a big hockey town, I skated all my life. And when Jack Kelly came to town, he replaced another coach who I skated for 1 year. That coach had won a national championship, but he was well out of his prime. And when Jack Kelly came in, he worked his players harder than anything or anybody that I could think of at this point, other than maybe the Navy SEALs. He was unrelenting on what he asked us to do, but he was also a huge proponent of the pride that each one of us had within us in our own performance. And he used the inspiration of bringing your own personal pride to the service so that you could excel in what we were doing and what we were attempting to do, which was ultimately to win a championship. Now, the group that we had didn't have enough championship skaters on it, but over time, he built championship teams, and every skater, every player that ever skated for him, I'm sure, learned the same lessons, that personal pride allows you to rise to levels of achievement that you never thought you would get there. Now, it requires hard work, and of course, that's part of the lesson. One of the reasons I succeeded in the business career is because I worked hard, and it was a great reward. And I can't thank Jack Kelly, who sadly or realistically just passed away a couple of weeks ago.
Sorry to hear.
Major influence on my persona, and I just can't speak highly enough of him. And thirdly, I'll share with you a fellow by the name of Bob Frick. I met Bob Frick as a result of my bicycle touring activities, and it's a long story, but ultimately he and I did 2 cross-country bicycle tours together, both supporting Habitat for Humanity, which was his one of his committed charities, and he'd done a lot of volunteer work and made major contributions to Habitat for Humanity. He was an very high-level senior executive at the Bank of America. Of course, in that realm, you know people who have real financial resources. And together, Bob and I made a wonderful team because he's not a professional, but he's a very skilled fundraiser. And I was the navigator, logistician, if you will, on our bike tours. And I also was a fundraiser a little bit, but I did the heavy lifting on the touring part. Bob did the heavy lifting on the donations part. And all across the country, we got to share Habitat for Humanity's story. And I got to watch Bob just as a human being who was committed to good charitable work. And it was a blessing. And the result was that in his 3 bicycle tours, 2 of which I was lucky enough to participate in, but he ended up raising well into 6-figure numbers in dollars to contribute to Habitat for Humanity, all for riding a bicycle across the country. And so what that did, of course, was reinforce what I'd actually learned. My family, I was taught from an early age, we didn't belong to a religion where they made you do the tithe and all that, but charitable work and volunteer work was part of the culture that I grew up in. And Bob Frick reinforced that with me, and is something that I appreciate from him and share with anybody that I can. So to summarize, if I could snap my fingers and just impart to others sage advice or lessons learned in life, I guess I'd say that you work hard and take pride in everything that you do. Recognize the high value of volunteer work and charity, and contribute to the spirit and the enthusiasm in the atmosphere that surrounds you through the gift of conversation. And with that, hopefully everybody can be as lucky as I've been in my career and in my life. And of course, the biggest stroke of good fortune in my life was meeting my wife. I got to tell this story. So I met my wife in San Diego, of all places, and she was a Canadian native. She grew up in French-speaking Canada, the province of Quebec, 3 hours downriver by car from Quebec City. And so anybody who knows Canada can go downriver 3 hours. And she and her girlfriend had graduated from nursery school and went to San Diego so that they could use that as a jumping off place to go to Mexico. As a Navy man in San Diego, as that age group does, they're always looking for companions, hopefully companions who have shared interests. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that my wife, Louiselle Marquis, which was her name, she would be a good companion to go to the hockey games, because she was the only person of dateable material that I found who understood what a blue line was. So we dated in San Diego, got married, and we're still together. And she is really the backbone to the successful life that I've had, and I just feel very, very fortunate. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Oh, this is beautiful, beautiful. What amazing stories. You share them with so much passion, with so much insight, with so much knowledge and inspiration. Really. Thank you so much, Len. And this is going to be shared to the world, definitely to the San Francisco Tour Guide Guild community, very beautiful and tight community, and thanks to a lot because of your contributions. Is there any one last thought, any one last point you would like to share? Any last idea?
I appreciate your enthusiasm.
Thank you.
And you've got your own passion which comes through. Isn't it amazing the way, passion just shows. You can't hide it.
Mm-hmm.
It is emotional currency that's worth sticking in the bank and generating compound interest on. But it's a pleasure working with you. I wish everybody success in our industry.
Yes.
I just hope
Oh,
it comes back, and
need it.
we'll just all pray together.
Yes. Oh, we need it. Yes. Definitely. Oh, goodness knows we do. Well, it's times for change. And as you've said, reinvent ourselves, take pride in what we do, and above all, keep up the hope. Thank you very, very much, Len. It's been an absolute honor for me and a great pleasure. Fabulous times I've had sharing this with you.
Yep. Take care.
And I'll talk to you very, very soon.
You bet. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.